Have you ever walked through the streets of New York City and wondered what stories its buildings could tell? Beyond the steel and glass, NYC's architecture holds secrets, tales of ambition, innovation, and forgotten eras. Prepare to see the city's iconic skyline in a whole new light as we uncover the hidden histories behind its most breathtaking structures. The hidden history of New York's architecture. Secrets beneath the skyline. The voice on the old recording was raspy, the sound of a microphone fighting dust and time, yet its urgency was undeniable. Dr. Elara Vance paused the playback, letting the final dramatic words hang in the stale air of her office. The office, tucked away on a forgotten mezzanine overlooking Pearl Street, was a cluttered cathedral of forgotten knowledge. Towering stacks of municipal records, brittle 19th-century ledgers, and more architectural renderings than any living person should possess. Elara, a structural historian, often referred to by her few clients as the city's ghost detective, didn't study what was built. She studied what was hidden. She leaned back, pushing a stray coil of original subway track diagram out of the way. The words were her grandfather's, the prologue to a series of radio broadcasts he had planned in the late 1950s, broadcasts that were mysteriously canceled before the first episode aired. It was his obsession with the city's unwritten history that had become her profession. Elara's current project was the Woolworth Building, the Cathedral of Commerce, they called it. A gleaming Gothic spectacle that at its completion in 1913 reigned as the tallest building in the world. It was a masterpiece of terracotta and steel, but for Elara, it was a structural riddle. For weeks, she had been meticulously cross-referencing Frank Woolworth's private construction diaries with the official city permits from the Department of Buildings, looking for the infinitesimal discrepancy that had consumed her grandfather's last years. She found it not in the diaries, but on her desk, in a plain manila envelope dropped off an hour ago by an unseen messenger. Inside lay a single, thin glass microfiche slide. It wasn't just old, it was obsolete. Microfiche had been largely replaced by digital scanning decades ago. Elara carefully loaded the slide into the heavy, antique reader in the corner, a machine that clunked and whirred like a dying clockwork beast. She focused the lens. The image that bloomed on the screen was not the familiar soaring steel cage of the Woolworth Tower. It was a section drawing, complex and precise, depicting the building's foundations. And beneath the official foundation, 30 feet below the sub-basement, past the registered bedrock and directly under the massive column that supported the central elevators, was a hidden subterranean space. It was vast. The drawing showed a cavernous, dome-ceilinged vault, approximately 80 feet wide and reaching nearly 200 feet back towards Broadway. It was labeled, simply, in a faded looping script, "The Deep Room." Elara felt a cold prickle of excitement. No city document mentioned this. No blueprint on record suggested an engineering feat of this scale hidden so far below ground. To excavate a space that large beneath the dense bedrock of Lower Manhattan during construction a century ago would have been an undertaking rivaling the tower itself. And to hide it completely required absolute collusion at the highest levels. Secrets beneath the skyline, her grandfather's words echoed. The diagram wasn't just a space, it detailed entry. A secondary shaft, disguised as a utility run for an abandoned steam line, dropped vertically from a non-load-bearing wall in the fifth-floor mezzanine. The plan showed an access point, a disguised door, flush with the ornate bronze elevator vestibule. Elara snatched her canvas bag, slipping the microfiche into a protective sleeve. The time for archival research was over. The time for fieldwork had arrived. 5 minutes later, she was standing in the opulent lobby of the Woolworth Building, the mosaic-tiled ceiling soaring above her, Tourists craned their necks to admire the Gothic arches and the whimsical carved portrait of Cass Gilbert, the architect, clutching a miniature model of the tower. Elara ignored the spectacle. Her focus was on the details no one else saw. She took the gilded cage elevator, the bronze doors sliding open with a sigh, up to the 5th floor. The floor housed quiet, private offices, far removed from the ground floor buzz. She located the target area, a small, dimly lit utility alcove next to a heavy, carved mahogany paneling. According to the map, the hidden door was here, perfectly integrated into the decorative paneling. Elara ran her fingertips across the intricate woodwork, feeling for seams. The mahogany felt solid, heavy, and cold. She knew that in buildings of this era, the illusion of seamless structure was often achieved through cunning joinery and disguised hinges. She worked slowly, looking not at the carving, but at the grain of the wood. If the panel opened, it had to pivot or slide. If it pivoted, the grain where the two sections met would never align perfectly, even a century later, due to the subtle expansion and contraction of the wood. She kneeled, ignoring the dust. Her fingers stopped at a point near the baseboard. The grain lines, following a perfect, elegant sweep, abruptly ceased and restarted at a slightly different angle. The difference was microscopic, less than the width of a human hair, but it was there. It was a structural lie hidden in plain sight. A sharp, metallic smell, like old copper and ozone, wafted from the infinitesimal crack. "Can I help you, ma'am?" a crisp voice asked. Elara straightened quickly. A security guard, impeccably dressed, stood 10 feet away, watching her with polite curiosity. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I'm with the structural survey team. We're confirming the exact layout of the legacy steam risers. Just checking some alignments." The guard glanced at the mahogany paneling, then at the dust on Elara's tweed blazer. "Those lines have been dead for 60 years, ma'am. No one uses them. You're not supposed to be touching the historical woodwork." "Of course," Elara said, backing away slowly. "I'll make a note of the obstruction and file my report. Have a good evening." She hurried back towards the elevators. The grain misalignment had confirmed the blueprint. The deep room was real. But the question remained, why would the tallest building in the world need a completely hidden, non-functional vault sunk deep beneath its foundations? And who was the person watching her from the opposite end of the hallway, standing perfectly still in the growing dusk, a silhouette against the arched Gothic window? She didn't wait to find out. As the elevator doors hissed shut, she saw the silhouette move, melting back into the shadows of the 5th floor, leaving her with the undeniable sensation that she hadn't just discovered a secret of the Woolworth Building. She had disturbed a grave. The hidden history of New York's architecture was about to demand a price. Chapter 2. The Iron Path. The elevator's descent felt too slow, a polished metal coffin carrying her away from a discovery that was either the key to a century-old conspiracy or a beautifully executed hoax. Elara didn't trust the lobby or the main entrance. The security guard was undoubtedly alerted, and the silhouette, tall, slender, and utterly motionless, had been too calculating to be an ordinary office worker. When the elevator doors sighed open onto the ground floor, she pivoted sharply and headed towards the smaller service stairwell, a concrete cavity rarely used by tenants. She emerged onto Barclay Street, a block west of the main commotion. The sky was the color of bruised slate, and the evening traffic was building, a loud, familiar shield against observation. She didn't feel safe until she was back in her office, the heavy, double-locked door secured behind her. She slumped on her ergonomic stool. The adrenaline crash left her trembling. Her eyes went immediately to the window, overlooking the grid of Pearl Street. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the cracked asphalt. Nothing seemed amiss, but the silence in her cluttered office was suddenly sinister, as if the dust motes themselves were holding their breath. The microfiche, tucked safely into its sleeve, was the immediate priority. She pulled the single glass slide out and, instead of the antique reader, placed it on her modern flatbed scanner, setting the resolution to maximum. The result was a crisp, high-resolution digital image of the deep room blueprint. Zooming in, Elara examined the drawing again. The deep room was not merely a vault. It was designed as a colossal anchor, reinforced with a dizzying, complex lattice of steel that extended into the bedrock. It was overkill for stability, even for a skyscraper of the Woolworth size. But what really mattered were the annotations. They were written in a curious cramped hand that was neither Cass Gilbert's nor Woolworth's, and they were not in English. She isolated a block of text.
Near the vault's central dome, sub terra, sed lumen ad sidera. Under the earth, but the light is toward the stars, Elara translated softly, a chill running up her spine. It was grandiose, almost Masonic. She zoomed in further, looking at the numerical measurements. They were the key. The dimensions of the deep room, 80 feet wide, 200 feet deep, were converted to a set of secondary figures annotated in red ink, 15.4.19 and 73.2.14. These numbers meant nothing in standard imperial or metric systems. Elara ran them through her private database, a digital graveyard of defunct architectural standards and forgotten engineering jargon she had compiled from her grandfather's work. After 10 tense minutes, the database chimed a match. The numbers corresponded to the felt grid system, an obscure experimental unit of measure briefly adopted by the New York Building Council in 1909 before being dismissed as overly complicated. It was based on converting fixed geographical coordinates into internal structural ratios, a niche within a niche. Only a handful of structural engineers had ever mastered it. And her grandfather, Dr. Arthur Vance, had been one of them. Elara pulled out a heavy, leather-bound journal from a locked steel cabinet, her grandfather's final, unfinished notebook. It fell open to a page marked with a dried flower. On the left were the numbers 15.4.19 and 73.2.14. On the right was a simple, elegant cipher. 15.4.19 equals the Great Shadow. 73.2.14 equals Ironheart. The Great Shadow. Elara's mind raced through the history of the New York skyline. Only one building was famously known for casting a shadow so absolute and controversial that it literally changed the law. The Equitable Building. Completed in 1915, 2 years after the Woolworth, the Equitable was a boxy 40-story behemoth that rose straight up from the sidewalk with no setbacks. It plunged the surrounding streets and neighboring buildings into permanent darkness, sparking public outcry and leading directly to the revolutionary 1916 zoning resolution, which mandated setbacks for all future skyscrapers. It was the architecturally perfect definition of the Great Shadow. Elara checked the coordinates of the Equitable Building's site, 120 Broadway, a mere 5 blocks from the Woolworth. The deep room in the Woolworth, the Cathedral of Commerce, was the anchor, but the next clue, Ironheart, lay hidden within the framework of the Equitable Building, the structure that killed the city's unlimited ambition. The connection was undeniable. The first 2 clues pointed to the 2 buildings that defined the birth of the modern skyscraper era in New York, structures that represented unbridled capitalism and the governmental reaction to it. But what was hidden inside the steel core of the Equitable Building? She stood up, reaching for her jacket. The black car she hadn't seen earlier was now parked across the street, its windows tinted, a dark, silent presence beneath the sodium street lamp. The man who had been watching her in the Woolworth Building wasn't just interested in the microfiche, he was interested in what she did with it. They knew she was on the move. Elara grabbed a small, heavy wrench, a piece of antique structural testing equipment, and slipped it into her coat pocket. She needed to get to 120 Broadway before whoever was in that car decided to come up and introduce themselves. The hidden history wasn't a dusty file or a forgotten blueprint. It was a physical roadmap built into the very bones of the city, and she was now walking the iron path.